Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. We'll start in a few minutes. Welcome. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. On behalf of Early Edge California and our speakers, we want to thank you for joining us today for our webinar about innovative approaches to identifying and supporting young dual language learners. At Early Edge California, we advocate for policy changes so more kids can have access to high quality early learning programs. So why? Why do we support dual language learners? Nearly 7.5 million children in the US are DLLs. Research shows that DLLs do better in school and in life when they receive adequate support to preserve and practice their home language. Early Edge California and our partners in Congress are advocating to advance federal funding to support dual language programs. Appropriations language was included in the Senate fiscal year 2023 explanatory statement. We will provide the language to all congressional staff and partners who have joined us today. So what's the purpose of today's webinar? Well, we want to highlight local, state, and federal approaches on how to support and identify dual language learners, and also showcase policy models that can be applied nationally. Our panelists today are local, state, and federal experts and practitioners. They will share their perspectives and models that can be applied to dual language programs across the country. We want to learn all together. Also, at the end of this program, speakers will answer questions from attendees. So please add your questions to the comment section of Facebook or YouTube. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce today's panelists. You can find details about their amazing bios in the chat. First, I want to introduce Montserrat Garibay, who is the Acting Assistant Deputy Secretary and Director for the Office of English Language Acquisition and Senior Advisor for Labor Relations, Office of Secretary, U.S. Department of Education. Montserrat was a bilingual pre-K teacher for 8 years and a national board certified teacher. Welcome, Montserrat. Now I'm thrilled to introduce Michael Rodriguez. Michael is the Executive Director of Dual Language Education of New Mexico, where he leads an experienced team of dual language educator trainers. Thank you for joining us, Michael. Next, I'm pleased to welcome Jessica Gutierrez. Jessica is a program manager for the Language Learning Project with Fresno Unified. Jessica has been a great partner for Early Edge for many years, and we thank her for her great work. All right, now that we all have our panelists here, and thank you for joining us. Let's dive in. Let's dive in and learn from each other. I'm going to start with Montserrat. So, in the President's fiscal year 2023 budget request, he called for $244 million increase in Title III funding, part of which could be used to support dual language learners. Can you share more about the administration's work and priorities to invest in dual language learners?
Sure. Primero que nada, muchas gracias. Thank you for having us. OLAS has a focus primary on multilingual learners through the different statutes that define the agency. And it is the discretionary grants and the National Clearinghouse for English Language Acquisition, NCELA. But I would say that the department as a whole is in charge with supporting the academic success and social emotional well-being of multilingual learners. And one of the so with that, one of the current challenges in expanding support nationally and locally is that sometimes services and staff capacity to provide those services are siloed with limited groups or individuals. So, one of the things that we want is we want them, instead, we want them to build capacity across all programs and services that serve all students to provide those services in ways that are individualized for multilingual learners. And here at the department, the work that we're doing is to model that for states and districts in how we collaborate, not for not only across the principal offices, but across agencies working towards a common outcome for multilingual learners, but taking ownership of our role, responsibility, and resources.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And the idea here is to, hear from the federal perspective. And now we're going to hear from New Mexico. And Michael, I mean, I know New Mexico has been doing a lot to support multilingual learners. The state passed the Bilingual Multicultural Education Act of 1973 and expanded the law in 2004. Can you share more about your work with dual language learners in New Mexico? And then is there any connection with what's happening at the federal level? I mean, tell us about, because we want to make the connections and see how can we all work together.
Sure. Thank you for having me today. And before I start, I know you started with kind of the current with at the federal level. I wanted to just give a little bit of background on our state because of the fact that we're so uniquely positioned in where we're at in our history, as well as our abilities to navigate, the whole advocacy scene here in New Mexico. So we are a homegrown nonprofit. We've been around since the early 2000s, and we really started out of a need that developed from Title VII funds are provided in the late 90s to start dual language programs in our state. So our former executive director and colleagues got together and just tried to find ways to support each other around best practices. What are best practices for dual language? And from that, it really grew into the many different offerings that our organization provides and the advocacy that we lead, as well as our National Dual Language Conference that we hold every year in November. So within our state, as I said, we're uniquely positioned because back in 1912, when it finally became a state, New Mexico had this elevated status for Spanish. So because there were so many Spanish soldiers, Mexican colonizers that came to New Mexico and stayed when it became a territory, when they were drafting our Constitution, there was some provisions in there. One, that Spanish was going to be an official language equal to English. And for a number of years, the laws actually had to be written in both languages. But there were a couple of provisions in there for specifically for education as well. So it required that the legislature provide for the training of teachers so that they could become proficient in both English and Spanish languages, really qualifying them to be able to teach Spanish-speaking pupils. And the other one is that children of New Mexico Spanish descent should never be denied the right or privilege of admission to attend in regular schools, and for what they said is forever enjoy perfect equality with other children in all public schools and educational institutions in New Mexico. So that's much different than when you see it in other state constitutions. From the beginning, like I said, Spanish had that status. I wish it was the same for our Native American languages, which were not treated in that same way. But that's kind of the history of our state. So with us, you mentioned the 1973 Bilingual Multicultural Education Act, which was passed here in the state. We look at opportunities like that or laws that were passed, and we find ways to, with our partners in the state, help to leverage at the state level how we view those things. So, being that it's going to be 2023, the January session is going to be the 50th anniversary. We're looking at helping our partners to draft a memorial at the legislature to, celebrate the things that we've done over 50 years with this law. Um, how far it's come as we reauthorized it in 2004 and provided more specifics and funding for bilingual programs. But how do we really make sure that we're looking at what we've accomplished, but how much more we still have not done that is required by law? So we really look at things like that. So within our Bilingual Multicultural Education Act, it provides funding for schools and districts, public charter schools, really helping them to ensure that students can become bilingual and biliterate. That's what's written in there. It's designed to serve our bilingual and multicultural students with a priority for our English learners. So obviously making sure that we know this is the best place for them to learn and taking full advantage of that. But it also provides funding for all bilingual programs in the state, specifically for dual language programs. If you have students that are not English learners, you can still get those bilingual funds in the hopes that they will also become bilingual. So in our strategic plan as an organization, we've really doubled down on being part of the solution in New Mexico, partnering with our local partners, our public education department, finding ways with institutes of higher ed to really make things happen.
Well, that's amazing. So many good things that are happening there and opportunities to learn from each other. So now I'm going to move to Jessica, who is our practitioner in the group. And, California, there's a lot happening, right? So we want to hear your perspective around AB 1363, the bill that Governor Newsom signed last year, and that you helped us so much around, really putting together a process to identify dual language learners. And for Early Edge as a sponsor, it was very important to hear the practitioner's perspective and not to add one more process and one more thing that will make it difficult, but something that will be easier and easy to incorporate in the daily practices. So, can you tell us more about it, just from your perspective? And because the goal is for us to learn. When Michael was talking, I was like, oh, so much things that we could, think about for California, but also from your perspective, can you tell us a little bit about what does it mean to identify DLLs and what should others learn about it so other states maybe can also start the process?
Yes, absolutely. Gracias, Patricia, and thank you for having me. Yes, we are so fortunate that the policymakers here in California, when working on AB 1363 and DLL identification, were really intentional about hearing practitioner voices, and that it's so important when thinking about policymaking and legislation, right? Because so many times we can hear, we can have this language and the intention behind these policies are great. However, implementation may look different. So we're so fortunate in that our policymakers here really were intentional about hearing practitioner voices. A little background about myself. I was a provider not so long ago in the classroom as a part of the language learning project here in California. And now I'm leading it as a program manager. And so I kind of have a unique perspective on the whole spectrum. But when we first started with thinking about DLL identification for CSPP, for preschool programs, we really thought about how we were doing it in Fresno Unified and how we were doing with the language learning project. As part of our Fresno Unified School District system, we have, of course, as an LEA, all families complete a home language survey during that enrollment process, right? The initial enrollment process. And that really serves as the initial DLL identification from families, right? So they are enrolling their children in our programs. And it's something that's similar, if you're familiar with AB 1363 in California, to the CDE family language instrument, right? So it consists of 4 questions that are really the overarching questions. So what language does your child learn when they first begin to speak? Those types of things, right? So those are done at the enrollment stage when children are being enrolled, and may not always be done with the classroom teacher. Those are done at the district level. It can be done with our enrollment staff, right? So then once our children are enrolled into our programs comes the next step of really involving and engaging the family. From the very first interaction, We know how important it is for all of our children, but especially our dual language learners, to engage families in supporting home language and supporting their language and development. So, prior to children beginning in our programs, all of our teachers have time set aside, what we call our family connections, to meet with families. And during this time, they have an interview that they conduct with families called the Family Languages and Interests Interview. And this differs from the home language survey in that this is a tool that's used by the teacher, right? So not an enrollment staff, but the actual teacher or provider is going to be in that care setting with the child and the family. And it's during their initial meeting with the family. It's really used to guide a conversation around language and culture. So it's not a form that the family completes, but it's really building that personal connection and really thinking about how we can support families in building their understanding of bilingualism and also building their understanding of how to support their child, right? And so, with the language and interest interview tool, it was originally developed by our dual language learner experts and creators of the POL strategies, our personalized oral language learning strategies. So, Dr. Lenny Espinosa, Dr. Carola Oliva Olsen, and Elizabeth Magruder developed it as a part of the language learning project, and that originated here in the Fresno community. And so, this interview tool really it's developed to capture a history of information about the child and the family and have that deeper conversation that conveys to the family, we care about your child, about their experience, about their language experience, and we recognize that it's an asset and that you are the expert, right, in this topic. And so it really, like we said, it builds that ongoing relationship with the family, captures information about them. So although it is very specific to DLL identification in that it has questions specifically about the languages children speak and the languages that families speak in their home and what other family members or friends or neighbors that the child might encounter that speak different languages. It also goes into building that relationship with DLL families, right? Listening to their wishes and hopes for their child. So it goes deeper in engaging the families and also reaching out to them as a resource that can support us in informing our planning around providing those language experiences. So really, the DLL identification goes so much further than just answering a question of whether their child is a DLL or not, but really thinking about how we can rely on the families to plan learning opportunities to meet the children's needs and really immerse them in that richness of language learning.
Thank you, Jessica. And before we move to the next question, I wanted, from Michael and Montserrat, any reactions of like thinking for at your, level, how do we think about an asset-based model, like from the beginning, right? Because as in California, we were thinking identification is just the first step, right? It's like we need to know we have, certain percentages in California, 60% of kids are dual language learners when they're in, before they turn 6. So how any reactions to like how do we work together to have an asset-based framework where we engage families from the first, first from the beginning? Anything you guys want to add?
Sure, I'll jump in. I taught pre-K for 8 years, so hearing you, Jessica, it's super exciting because I did home visits when I was a teacher, and that connection, right? Parents bring these funds of knowledge to the classroom, and when you invite them and open the doors to the classrooms to come and their children see them as examples of and empowers them also. The parents are empowered to be there, and they learn so much, right? They can also shadow the teachers to see what kind of questions they ask the kids and just really build onto that. It's so good to hear that. So I think, so one of the things that OELA promotes is exactly that, what you're saying, right? The asset-based approach. So when monolingual English speakers gain proficiency in languages, it's seen like it's an intellectual accomplishment and cultural and a professional asset, right? That it's value in businesses and also international affairs and higher education. But like, for instance, also in high school, in world languages are required for admission for colleges in the United States. Many of this is one of the requirements, but that is an asset-based worldview about language learning. Unfortunately, the efforts of speakers of language other than English who are learning English as an additional language are viewed not with the same admiration and respect, right? So EL instruction is often viewed as remedial when in fact it is the first instruction in a new language, and the efforts of EL students to learn a new language while simultaneously learning new content in that language deserves to be admired, celebrated, and supported. So these attitudes influence how we communicate language learning goals to the students and families, and how we talk about students and their achievement. An educator who has an asset-based mindset appreciates that a student is learning a new language. They just may need additional time to process that information in that language, right? And one of the things that we're doing here with OELA is that we're really trying, and through different workshops, webinars, we're really uplifting those best practices, and highlighting those best practices that are essential in different areas in the whole nation, so others can look and learn from them.
Great.
What I want to add is just that I echo everything that was said regarding the need for that connection with families, and when it comes to families and communities, they're really the ones who are going to make your dual language program sustainable, right? It has to be based around what their needs are, what their beliefs are, and including their customs and the assets that they bring as families to the program as well. So making sure that they have that ownership of the program is essential. And one of the things that we've learned over the last 6 years, we've been fortunate enough through Kellogg grants to be able to work with some of our indigenous populations here in New Mexico. And there is no language without culture and community when it comes to the ownership of that language by the different tribes. So that's something that we've always believed, but it's even reinforced even more on a deeper level for us based on that work. The other part of sustainability, it comes from making sure that when you say that you're about dual language and that you're really pushing these programs forward, it has to be owned at all levels of your district, your school, your state entities, so that message is clear and that it's out there to folks who don't quite get it yet. And there's you're helping to inform your adversaries in that way.
Great. This is great. Thank you all for sharing this. So, I mean, we know that there is a teacher shortage, and that we need to be creative about where do we find these bilingual teachers. So I wanted, Montserrat, maybe if you can share what the administration is thinking about, how do we get this bilingual teachers that are out there that maybe need more resources and opportunities to be in the classroom. And also, I mean, for Michael and Jessica, yes, your perspective, and also if you're not bilingual, we know that there are other things you can do right in the classroom. So maybe Jessica, think about it, because you're being in the classroom, and so sharing that there are many opportunities and to celebrate culture and to be inclusive. So Montserrat, if you can share first.
Yes, so we know there are bilingual teacher and bilingual teacher shortages throughout our nation. I think one of the things that is really important to point out is that we have a lot of teachers. However, we're not respecting them with the salaries that they need. Many teachers have 1, 2, 3 jobs outside their real job. And it is important that we respect them by paying them properly, and also providing them with the tools that they need, with planning time that they need in the classrooms, with class sizes. And that is something that the secretary is always emphasizing, and we're highlighting districts that are doing that. So right now, we just a few weeks ago, we released the August Hawkins Center of Excellence, which for FY22, it's a competition of $8 million that we provided it was provided to MSIs with funding to prepare and increase the number of highly qualified teachers of color. The Department of Education has added a competitive added a competitive priority for programs that prepare bilingual and multilingual teachers of color to become fully certified to teach ESL or to teach in dual language programs. So that's one. The other thing is also that the department, our office actually just, I think 2 weeks ago, recently awarded nearly 120 million dollars over 5 years under the National Professional Development Program, the NPD program, to support educators and English language learners. And the NPD program provides grants to eligible institutions to higher education and or public or private entities with relevant experience and capacity in consortia with states and districts to implement professional development activities that improve instruction for English language learners. And following the education priorities of the Biden and Harris administration, as a state, like the Secretary Cardona says, these grants align with his call to boldly address opportunity and achievement gaps by investing in recruiting and also supporting professional development of a diverse educator workforce. And this is including bilingual educators. So education jobs are the ones that people are from all the backgrounds can pursue. And educator effectiveness is the most important school factor affecting student achievement and success. So to improve the academic achievement of ELs, this NPD program supports pre-service and in-service instruction for teachers and other staff, including leaders working with ELLs, paraprofessionals, and these selected applicants that submitted the proposals to improve access to culturally and linguistically responsive early learning environments for multilingual learners, and to increase public awareness about the benefits of proficiency in more than one language. The NPD grants support the professional growth of education workforce by promoting the skills and critical disposition of educators and leaders. And these grants can enhance the capacity of the education workforce to create equitable learning environments that promote language literacy and diversity. And also, let's not forget about the American Rescue Plan funding that was released under this administration. We are seeing very different districts utilizing this funding in different ways, right? For instance, there's some states that are helping paraprofessionals become certified teachers so they can work in the classrooms where they live and where they have been working as paraprofessionals as well. And this is a time where many districts are working in collaboration with colleges, with the district to promote the different paths to become bilingual educators. So those are just a few.
Oh, that's a lot. It's exciting. Michael, do you want to, add to, maybe some initiatives in New Mexico? And then I see that there are some questions on the chat.
Sure.
After Jessica,
Sure.
we'll go to those.
Yeah, so the whole idea of teacher shortages is definitely a moving target, right? We were seeing things starting to align, and then pandemic hit, and it just totally changed the landscape. So we're in that process of rebooting and kind of reorganizing with like-minded organizations here in our state. And we're not immune to any of those same things that Montserrat was talking about in terms of shortages for teachers in general, but even more profoundly for bilingual teachers. As an organization, some of the things that we do are advocacy, right, at the state level, to make sure that we're being part of that solution with growing your own. So we partner with Educators Rising here in New Mexico. Teach Plus New Mexico is another entity that's focused on that as well. Within our own organization, through our national conference, we're able to do a benefit dance, and we hold different fundraising pieces to get scholarships for high school seniors who want to be bilingual teachers, or educational assistants that want to become bilingual teachers as well. As a state here in New Mexico, our governor and our legislature in the last several years have really been pushing some initiatives to help with that shortage as well. So there's been some significant raises. In the last year, there was 7% raises given to teachers, as well as an increase to our base pay. So we have a 3-tiered teaching system here, where beginning teachers start at 50,000. Level 2 teachers, when they demonstrated that mastery, moved to 60,000, and then our most educated and most trained staff become get paid at the $70,000 starting. So that's a huge change for us, and we're now the highest salaries in our region. So that's a huge deal for us. So while lots of folks were leaving the profession during the pandemic, we now see some folks who are now looking at education as a serious way to work in their careers. We also have our state that our governor and legislature who have provided or eliminated some of those barriers to higher education by creating and funding opportunity scholarships in addition to the lottery scholarships we already have for folks coming out of high school. So education has been looked at more seriously, and we now have some avenues for folks to be able to access that and not have to worry as much about the tuition piece of that. Within our work, we do have some folks that work with us through a kind of sub-entity that we've developed, which is called Educators for a Multilingual, Multicultural America. And with that, Dr. Jonah Chance and Dr. Michael Guerrero helped us to copyright the National Dual Language Education Teacher Preparation Standards. So the first teacher preparation standards for higher ed in dual language. And we're seeing lots of traction with folks starting to adopt those, both at the pre-service level as well as in-service level, because of the need for what does it look like? How do we make sure that we're supporting our teachers and being sustainable in our endeavors? So we're really excited about that. And when I was an administrator, seeing when things are aligned, when they're sustainable, and you provide that support for teachers. Teachers aren't afraid to work hard, and they want to make sure that it's for good causes somewhere, and they're part of a bigger plan. So I had a comment from a first grade teacher that always stuck with me the 15 years I was an administrator. She said, "I've never worked so hard in my career, but I've never felt so good doing it." So we need to make sure that we are respecting teachers, and that's how we'll keep them.
Awesome, great. Thank you for sharing. Now, Jessica, do you want to share your perspective on this topic?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you, Patricia. And just building off of what Montserrat and Michael said, fortunately for us in our district in Fresno Unified, it's not the case that we have a teacher shortage, and I think that's greatly attributed to our teacher development departments really working tirelessly to develop those multiple pathways, as you all were talking about, in partnership with those local institutes of higher education, really working to include specific pathways for people like our preschool teachers who want to earn their credential, authorizing them to teach TK, right? We know that UTK expansion in California is where we anticipate the most growth. And so we are really prioritizing those high need areas, as well as supporting dual language learners. And so another thing is that our district has been really active in applying for all the grants that become available to support our teacher development. So we recently applied for the Early Education Teacher Development Grant in partnership with our Office of Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. So really thinking about all those supports that are there. And then, as you were saying, Montserrat, also the professional development, right, for our providers. So thinking about how we incorporate professional learning for all of our providers and embedding it into our system, so it's not something that they have to go out and seek, right, to support our dual language learners, so that's embedded, those high leverage topics. For example, in Fresno Unified in our early learning department, we're responsible for providing that professional learning for all of our early learning programs. So that includes our full day, full year centers, our preschool programs, and TK. And so we're able to design that professional learning around those high leverage topics, which include how do you support dual language learners, right? And that professional learning goes hand in hand with that asset-based coaching support. So really it's twofold, right? Those teacher development pathways, but also that professional learning support that's job embedded, and really thinking about our work here as a part of Fresno Unified and as a part of the Language Learning Project, where we're working to support professional learning for DLL providers statewide. And so the objective of the Language Learning Project is really to provide training for childcare and early learning providers across the state to ensure that dual language learners have a strong foundation in both English and home language, right? So we're working with communities statewide to support in building their own capacity to implement these strategies and this learning and this professional learning into their communities.
Mhm. So, I mean, hearing from the three of you, it's like interesting to see the different perspectives. There are opportunities for funding, right? And each state is doing different things, to support teachers. But the common theme is like we all believe like an asset-based framework, right? We all want to recognize our teachers, pay them more, and then also support those who maybe are not bilingual, but that will work with bilingual kids. I know Jessica and Montserrat too, because you were a teacher, especially Jessica, because you've been in professional development. How can you share a little bit about that? That's possible, right? So, I remember one time I was in one of your classrooms, and some of the teachers were like, "Oh, I didn't know that I could do that," and it's just like all right, it's not that hard. There's so many things that I can do to create those inclusive, classrooms that it seems like we all been to, and that could be something more common across the US.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Patricia. And as you know, working with you for so many years, this is one of my favorite topics, right? Thinking about how we can support dual language learners. And you do not have to be bilingual. While that's a great asset, and we know um, that it greatly supports our dual language learners, there are strategies, there are concrete ways to support children and families who are dual language learners without being bilingual. And when we're thinking about languages and culture, no one teacher is ever going to be able to speak all of the languages of all the children in their classroom. So whether or not you're bilingual, for example, myself, I am bilingual in English and Spanish, but there are other languages that I am not familiar with and I cannot speak. And there are children, especially here in Fresno, we have a high Hmong community, right? I'm not able to speak Hmong, but I'm still able to support those children and families. And that's where things like our personalized oral language learning strategies come in, our poll strategies as a part of the language project. And I can go on and on, but I will keep it a little short, just about their specific ways to be able to support. And things like our poll strategies were designed specifically with those educators in mind who are not multilingual, who are monolingual English speaking, and strategies for them to support children and families. And those things all are different ways. There are instructional supports, environmental supports, family supports, really, again, going back to the family and using them as home language support, relying on your community and others around you. But there are a number of ways. So the number one thing we want to do, especially, is not to discourage educators from feeling like they have nothing to contribute. They have everything to contribute, right? And we want to make sure that we're lifting that up and really bringing that a part of our work as providing professional learning and being advocates, right, for this work, is really to support educators in understanding their role and how important it is that they first believe this, right? They have this asset framework and then help put it into action. But really, it's to support them in gaining that knowledge of how they can best support dual language learners.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, why it's so important to see it, go and visit classrooms. So I invite everyone to, if you have, find a bilingual or dual language immersion program that you can see, because once you see it, you're like, oh, really? It can't happen. So it is. That's how every time that I have a chance, I go and really see it, because it is possible and it's amazing, like what our teachers can do if we provide the technical assistance and support. Which I'm going to pass it to maybe Montserrat and share a little bit more about these opportunities that the federal government has.
Yes, thank you. As a teacher, I always said we had this saying of sharing is caring, right? And the more that we share information, it's the best, because that's the way that we learn as teachers. So one of the very great things about OLI is our technical assistance for states and districts. So we know that professional learning is most effective when it's job embedded and sustained, like Jessica was saying. So what OELA provides technical assistance and professional learning opportunities for state and district leaders who lead the development and facilitation of districts and school-based approach professional learning for teachers. So with the OELA webinars that we have and the resources on the National Clearinghouse for English Language Acquisition in CELA, they promote professional learning activities that, number one, recognize that language development is a consequence of not the prerequisite for academic content instruction. Two, they promote the use of level the field supports, which include the use of native language instruction and assessment. Three, promote assess-based approach to language learning and student articulation. And three, promote pre-service and in-service programs that prepare teachers to teach in bilingual programs. And I'm sure that I asked to add the Encela page, resource page as well, because as I saw in one of the comments, you don't have to be a bilingual teacher to utilize. These are best practices, and they can be used for teaching everyone. And I think that is something that we really need to share with everyone, that these, we have students who are visual learners, that learn through hearing, tactile, etc. Well, those best practices that we utilize with English language learners can be used with everyone, and we should take advantage of that.
So many resources, and I think that after this call, we kind of, as Early Edge, put it all together, because sometimes there's so much, we hear it like it's overwhelming, but now we have kind of like at every level, so people can go in and see where the resources are and who to talk to. So this is great, and we'll put it together so people have that. And Michael, I know you also wanted to share a few things about opportunities for training in New Mexico.
Sure. So I did share, and I hope it can be shared with the entire group, the link to the National Dual Language Teacher Preparation Standards. But we also are a service provider, and like I said, we're New Mexico focused, but we have partners in all corners of the country where we help them to work with their leadership team. So like I said, when you look at sustainability, you need to make sure you board your district leaders that are not directly involved with the language. Your communities all understand how decisions that they make are going to impact your program either positively or negatively. So we do a lot of that program development and leadership training, as well as instructional trainings. So we have a number of different instructional offerings where we look at best practices that are going to support language development for students.
Great. See more and more resources. We just have to talk to each other more so we can know about them. I am now gonna, I think, ask participants to add their questions, because we have a few more minutes, and so they take advantage of these amazing experts to try to answer the questions. So please feel free to add your questions in the chat. And while you're doing this, I am gonna see if there's any. So I think we started the conversation around ideas on how to kind of like have this asset-based perspective. So anything else that we could be doing, thinking about that to make it widespread, right? Like I think for us in California, we're trying to push up, starting in preschool, as Jessica was saying, it's all about connecting with the parents. And that's a huge piece that we haven't talked, is like, really, how do we communicate to parents that you should continue to support home language, right? That it's important to talk your home language at home, and partner with your teacher on that. So any other ideas you want to share to really make a case and make it not just pre-K or just a few schools, but more like, can we do like a more national, push for an asset-based approach?
I think definitely just building off of that, like when we're thinking about our families, right? They are the number one advocates right? They're the number one people who have the voices. But we also have to think about who are the people that are interacting with them, and those are educators,
Mm-hmm.
right? So our educators are able to have this connection. And if they're knowledgeable, if they have the information, if they have the understanding of the importance of dual language learners continuing with their home language, if they have the concepts and the facts and to support the importance of bilingualism, they're our pathway into supporting our families and advocating for their children, right? To become a community wide advocacy rather than just one parent or one school or one classroom, right? And so something that we've done here in Fresno, what we do with communities we work with, is just making sure that we support our teachers and the providers that we work with through professional learning on understanding the importance of bilingualism. We share research with them that they're able to then share with families. And it doesn't have to be these research papers that may be difficult to interpret and understand, right? But really things that they're able to share that are straightforward, that are easy to understand, where families can understand and be assured that the use of home language is essential to maintaining and continuing to develop their home language. You know, it's really important to supporting their children's English language development. So making sure that we're sharing that with and arming, right, for lack of a better word, our teachers, and making sure that their understanding is well developed so that they can support families in addressing any concerns or questions about how to best support their child's language development and learning. So it begins really with that partnership, that strong and mutually respectful partnership between families and teachers, and using the connection that teachers have with families.
And taking that same concept and looking at it a broader sense, there are lots of misconceptions about how dual language works. You know, what the purpose
Mhm.
is, what we're trying to accomplish with it, and lots of times people think, well, yeah, if we want these kids to be successful in English, we need to teach them in English.
Mm-hmm.
The research has shown us that just throwing Spanish-speaking kids into English programs is not the best way to support them. Right, we have to have that asset-based lens and to really um, build up those assets that they've already developed, build up that foundation that they have in the home language, so that they can transfer it. And what that does is it helps them to acquire English more quickly. It helps them to keep their home language, and it helps them to keep their culture and their identity throughout the process. So there's lots of misconceptions there, but there's also misconceptions from folks about how they can best support this. So it's important to make sure that your principals know, your district folks know, and community business folks know this is something that's going to benefit all of us, right? We're all for high academic achievement, right? We're all for bilingual, biliterate workforces, and social cultural competence is something that's really going to help us as a society to continue to move forward.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think one of the exciting things about working with Dr. Cardona is like he says this all the time, right? Like your bilingualism and your biculturalism is your superpower.
Mm-hmm.
And I think really using the bully pulpit from this side, that yes, that is your superpower. And here at the department and with Oela, we're really trying to uplift that message, to make sure that people understand the importance of embracing these great assets that kids bring and families bring to our public schools, right? And with that also, like, I think the importance of the family engagement initiatives are often predicted on a fundamental assumption that the educators and families charged with developing effective partnerships between the home and the school already uh, possess prerequisite skills of knowledge and confidence and the belief system, um, the collective capacity to successfully implement and sustain these important home school relationships. It's so important. Unfortunately, that's not the case, right? Like Jessica and Michael was sharing. Family engagement that leads to student success develops the capacity of families to be decision makers in the educational options for their children, and the collaborators with school staff and members of the community on issues of school improvement, right? And also it develops the capacity of the school staff to provide equitable services to the diverse communities that they are aware of, right? The value and adapt the diversity among the communities that they serve. So, in support of the bilingual education, this dual capacity of building can be focused on the outcomes of that articulate bilingualism and biliteracy. And this includes leveraging multiple means of communication with families, providing bilingual literacy resources and activities that strengthen the language development at home in students' native language, heritage language, and all their linguistic assets. So sometimes we see one-way communication where schools send information home, but we don't see the structures and the opportunities for reciprocal communication, and the transfer of funds of knowledge from the families designed to improve the school and learning environment. We need to promote that and show multilingual families and students that we value their culture, their language, their voice, and their participation in our communities, because they are their communities as well.
Thank you. So much to think about, and I think that the common theme is like we believe bilingualism is an asset, and we just need to work at every level, right, to make that happen. So because it seems like there are resources out there, there's funding, and we just need to focus on communication and making a case. Which I wanted to ask for the last few minutes to the panelists to think about. If you can talk to a policymaker at the federal level or the state level, what would be like the key message? What would be like your ask in terms of what we discussed today? And I can start while you think about it. But for us in California is, we want every child in California to have the opportunity to attend a bilingual program, right? That's our dream. And I think we're like, we've taken important steps, and Jessica has been a witness and a partner, right? But, there is a long way, because we know all the benefits of bilingualism for both native, only English speakers, but multilingual learners, right? For everyone. Two is better than one. And especially for dual language learners, just the benefits in terms of learning, but also to be proud of their culture. I am a dual language learner, and from my perspective, yes, it's great to have the benefits, but also to feel that I can be proud of my culture, right, and where I come from. So anything you want to share, if you had the opportunity to push for an ask or a message, and anyone, please jump in.
I think, Patricia, just building off of we were sharing earlier, like amplifying provider voices. Anytime that we are considering some kind of legislation or policy, or thinking that, just even having a notion of something that we're wanting to do, amplify those provider voices. And as you were saying, go into those different learning settings, see what's really happening there. And these providers should be sitting at these tables and in these conversations, because they're the ones that will ultimately be implementing whatever policy or whatever legislation comes out. And so really thinking about having them be a part of the building process, so that they're there supporting with the intention of that bill or that policy moving forward. And then when it gets to actual implementation, right, and putting it into practice, you have that voice and they're able to provide feedback. So just continue to amplify provider voices within these conversations around legislation and policy.
Yeah, I think for me, what I would say to legislators is do what you can to remove the barriers. And in order to remove barriers, you have to understand the research, right? You have to understand how dual language programs work, why they work, the structure of them, and the fact that we're not ever going to be taking that language away from them along the way, right? We're going to support both the home language and English all the way through graduation, so that they can be bilingual seal recipients. They can become our next pool of dual language teachers. So the other thing that I would look at is, at the state education level, is making sure that state entities have an equitable, I guess, definition or understanding of how they can utilize Title III funds, so that they're able to access all the different resources that are available to them to support students. And as we work with different entities around the state, around the country, we hear different interpretations of what Title III can be used for. And, there's the whole fine line they walk with supplementing versus supplanting funds. But, there's so much more that can be done for English learners with Title III funds than they're sometimes able to.
I would say knowledge is power, right? I would encourage everyone, as we have mentioned, teacher collaboration between language teachers and content teachers is super important. Sharing those professional learning experiences, co-planning or co-teaching is essential, right? At the district level. Also promoting state and district level activities to increase the retention of new and teachers and non-tenured teachers is essential. And also protecting teachers' planning and professional learning activities is also fundamental. And I mean, we can, this is a really important topic and we can talk more about it, but I think the implementation of the federal policies, the use of federal funds, and or the operationalization of the resources and practices that our department provides happens so much at the state and the local district level where students are, right? So local politics, values, belief, and the dispositions play a part in the local implementation. And ed partners and advocates, just like Early Age California, play an important role in building that capacity of the education workforce to provide high quality instruction or multilingual learners in early settings. So at the end of the day, I think that intentional collaboration is essential, and is something that we are seeing, like coming from the state to the federal level and seeing those intentional collaborations of how different entities are working together to support our most precious assets, our children, and their education, for me has been eye-opening, because I've seen that when those districts have everyone at the table problem solving, the students get the best of everything. So I would definitely recommend that intentional collaboration and having everybody at the table.
Well, thank you. This was amazing, and I wish we had 2 more hours to keep talking. But sadly, the time went fast, which is a good sign. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing their expertise and perspective. We're so lucky to have such an amazing and passionate leaders with us today. There's so much more work to do. This is just the beginning. Can't wait to continue our conversations. And thank you for everybody who participated today. So grateful for your interest and in supporting DLLs, and I hope that this was helpful. We will send an email with resources and also the appropriations language that was included in the Senate fiscal year 2023, so you can help us and support that process. Then that's all for today. Muchas gracias. This was a pleasure, and have a good evening.